The restaurant was known for being calm, quiet, and expensive. Soft lights reflected off polished tables. Gentle music played low in the background, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to distract. People came here to relax, to feel important, and to enjoy a sense of control that money often brings. Every detail was carefully planned, from the way the chairs were placed to how the staff walked and spoke. Nothing loud, nothing messy, nothing out of place. It was a busy evening, but not chaotic. Couples talked softly. Business partners leaned close, discussing deals in low voices. A few solo guests scrolled through their phones while waiting for their meals. The staff moved smoothly between tables, trained to smile, nod, and disappear at the right moment. For them, this was not luxury. It was work. Among the staff was a young waitress working the evening shift. She had already been on her feet for hours, but her posture remained polite and steady. She had learned long ago that customers did not care about tired legs or sore hands. What they noticed was tone, speed, and attitude. So she focused on doing her job well. She checked orders twice, kept her voice calm, and made sure no glass stayed empty for too long. She had worked in many places before, but this restaurant was different. The guests here expected perfection. Some were kind, others were not. Over time, she learned to tell the difference within seconds of approaching a table. A glance, a sigh, a certain way someone looked at her shoes instead of her face. These small signs told her how careful she needed to be. That evening, she was assigned a table near the center of the restaurant. It was a large table, clearly reserved in advance. The chairs were pulled back slightly, waiting. The manager had quietly mentioned that an important guest would be sitting there. That usually meant someone wealthy, someone powerful, or both. It also meant mistakes would not be forgiven. When the guests arrived, the room seemed to notice. Not loudly, but subtly. Heads turned for just a moment. Conversations paused and then resumed. The man walked with confidence, wearing a simple but expensive outfit that did not need to show off. He looked calm, almost distant, as if the room belonged to him. Beside him walked a woman who stood out in a different way. Her clothes were stylish and bold. Her expression was sharp. She scanned the room as if judging it, not enjoying it. The waitress took a slow breath before approaching them. She greeted them politely, using the practiced tone she had perfected over the years. The man nodded slightly and thanked her. His voice was even, controlled. The woman did not respond at first. She looked at the menu, then at the table, then finally at the waitress, her eyes cool and impatient. The waitress asked if they would like water or wine. The man answered calmly. The woman corrected him, saying she wanted something specific, something rare. Her voice carried a hint of annoyance, as if the question itself was a waste of her time. The waitress listened carefully, repeating the order back to make sure it was correct. She had learned that repeating orders could prevent trouble later. As she walked away, she felt the familiar tension in her shoulders. Not fear, exactly. More like awareness. She knew this table would require extra attention. She knew that every small detail would matter. Still, she reminded herself to stay calm. She had handled difficult guests before. This would be no different. When she returned with drinks, she placed them carefully on the table. The man thanked her again. The woman looked at her glass, frowned slightly, and asked if it was chilled enough. The waitress apologized politely and offered to replace it immediately. The woman sighed, loud enough to be noticed, and waved her hand as if dismissing the apology. Around them, other guests continued their meals. But the energy near that table felt different, tight, controlled, like a string pulled too far. The waitress felt it, but chose not to react. She kept her face neutral and her movements smoothed out as the evening went on. The pattern became clear. Nothing the waitress did was openly wrong, yet nothing seemed right enough. The woman asked questions in a sharp tone. She pointed out tiny issues that most people would ignore. A fork placed a little too close. A pause that lasted a second too long. Each comment was small, but together they formed a cloud of pressure. The man noticed it too. He listened quietly, his eyes sometimes moving from the waitress to the woman and back again. He did not interrupt. He did not raise his voice. But there was a change in his expression, subtle and slow, as if he were thinking deeply about something unrelated to the menu. The waitress did her best to stay professional. Inside, she felt the familiar mix of frustration and embarrassment that service workers know too well. She wanted to explain that she was doing her job, that she was trying her best. But she also knew that explanations were often seen as excuses. So she stayed quiet, smiled politely, and continued working. At one point, she accidentally brushed the edge of the table while setting down a plate. It made a soft sound, barely noticeable. But the woman reacted immediately, pulling her hand back and looking at the waitress with clear irritation. She said something about carelessness, her voice sharp enough to turn a few heads nearby. The waitress apologized again, her voice calm but her face warm with embarrassment. She checked the table, making sure nothing had spilled. Nothing had. The reaction felt bigger than the mistake. But she did not argue. She stepped back, giving the table space. Nearby diners began to notice the tension more clearly now. A couple at the next table exchanged a glance. A man across the room paused mid-sentence. It was not a scene yet, but it felt close to becoming one. The manager watched from a distance, pretending to organize menus while keeping an eye on the situation. He knew the balance was delicate. Important guests could bring good reviews or serious trouble. He trusted the waitress, but he also understood how quickly things could turn. As the main dishes arrived, the waitress carefully described each plate, making sure to explain ingredients and preparation. The man listened attentively. The woman interrupted once, correcting a detail that did not matter. The waitress nodded and thanked her for the correction. Even though she knew she was right. By now, the waitress felt tired in a different way. Not just physically, but emotionally. Every word she spoke felt like walking on thin ice. Still, she reminded herself that the shift would end, that tomorrow would come, that this moment, however uncomfortable, would pass. What she did not know was that this table was not just another difficult experience. It was the beginning of something much bigger, a moment that would change how everyone in that room remembered the night. For now, though, the restaurant remained quiet. The music played softly. Plates were lifted and set down. And beneath the calm surface, tension continued to grow, waiting for the moment it would finally break. The tension at the table did not fade as the meal continued. If anything, it grew heavier with each passing minute. The waitress could feel it every time she walked near that table. Her steps became more careful, her breathing slower. She reminded herself to stay focused, to treat this like any other shift. Even though it no longer felt normal. The woman at the table leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she tasted the food. Her expression did not soften. Instead, she examined each bite as if searching for a reason to complain. She pointed out things in a low but sharp voice. Too salty, too slow, too basic for a place like this. None of it sounded loud enough to cause a scene, but it was clear she wanted control, not comfort. The man remained quiet. He ate slowly, listening more than speaking. Every now and then he glanced around the restaurant, noticing how people were enjoying themselves. Laughter from another table. A waiter smiling as he refilled glasses. It was a peaceful place, and the contrast between that calm and the tension at his table was impossible to ignore. When the waitress returned to check if everything was okay, the woman did not look up right away. She continued cutting her food, then finally spoke without meeting the waitress's eyes. She questioned why the dish looked different from what she expected. The waitress gently explained the preparation, keeping her tone respectful. She even offered to replace the plate if there was a problem. That offer seemed to irritate the woman even more. She accused the waitress of being careless and wasting her time. Her voice rose just enough for nearby tables to hear. The restaurant grew quieter again, not silent, but alert. People sensed something uncomfortable was happening. The waitress felt her face grow warm. She apologized once more, her words soft and controlled. Inside, she felt small, but she did not let it show. She had learned that reacting emotionally only made situations worse. She took the plate back, even though she knew it was prepared correctly. As she walked toward the kitchen, her hands trembled slightly. She paused for a moment near the service area, taking a deep breath. Another staff member noticed her expression and asked quietly if she was okay. She nodded. There was no time to explain. Orders were waiting. The shift was still moving. In the kitchen, the chef listened as she explained the complaint. He frowned but said nothing. They both knew how this worked. The dish was remade without argument. No questions. No pride. Just speed and silence. When the waitress returned to the table, she placed the new plate down carefully, making sure everything was perfect. She stepped back and waited. The woman examined the plate again, her eyes narrow. For a moment, it looked like she might say something else. Then she tasted it. Instead of calming down, she pushed the plate slightly away. She accused the waitress of attitude, of not respecting her. The accusation felt sudden and unfair. The waitress was caught off guard, but she still responded politely, asking what she could do to improve the experience. That was when the woman stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the soft music. Heads turned instantly. Conversation stopped. The sound alone changed the energy in the room. The woman pointed at the waitress, her face tight with anger. She spoke about respect, about service, about how people should know their place. The waitress froze. She felt the room watching her. She wanted to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but her throat felt tight. She had never been yelled at like this before, not so openly, not in front of so many people. The man stood up slowly as well, but he did not speak yet. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused. He looked at the woman, then at the waitress. It was clear he was paying attention to every detail. The woman took a step closer to the waitress. Her voice was now loud enough for everyone to hear. She accused her of ruining the evening, of embarrassing her. The manager started moving toward the table. Sensing that things were slipping out of control, then it happened, in a sudden motion. The woman raised her hand and struck the waitress across the face. The sound was sharp and unmistakable. It echoed through the restaurant like a dropped plate. For a brief second, no one moved. No one spoke. The music continued to play softly, almost strangely, as if nothing had happened. The waitress staggered back, stunned. Her face burned where she had been hit. She did not cry out. She did not fall. She simply stood there, shocked, her eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. A few guests gasped. Someone whispered. A glass clinked as a hand shook. The manager froze mid-step, his expression filled with disbelief. The woman lowered her hand, breathing hard. She looked around as if daring anyone to challenge her. For her, the act felt justified. For everyone else, it felt unreal. The man did not move at first. He stared at the woman beside him, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at the waitress. His jaw tightened slightly. The calm confidence he had carried earlier was gone, replaced by something deeper and more serious. The waitress finally blinked. She touched her cheek gently, more in disbelief than pain. Her hands were shaking now. She felt exposed, embarrassed, and helpless all at once. Years of hard work, patience, and silence had led to this moment. The restaurant remained frozen. No one knew what to do next. No one knew who would speak first. The power in the room had shifted, but no one yet understood how in that heavy silence. The moment stretched on, longer than it should have. And everyone present knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The silence after the strike felt endless. It pressed down on everyone in the room, heavy and uncomfortable. The waitress stood still, her body stiff, her mind racing. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and uneven. Her cheek felt hot, but the shock was worse than the pain. She had been treated poorly before, but never like this. Not in front of so many people. The manager was the first to move. He stepped forward quickly, his voice tight as he asked if everyone was okay. His eyes went to the waitress, then to the woman, then to the man standing beside her. He looked unsure, caught between duty and fear. This was not a normal situation, and everyone knew it. A few guests stood up from their chairs. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. Phones stayed in pockets for the moment, but hands hovered, tempted. No one wanted to miss what would happen next. The man finally spoke. His voice was low but clear. It cut through the room without effort. He asked the waitress if she was hurt. The question was simple, but it changed everything. It shifted attention away from the woman and toward the person who had been harmed. The waitress swallowed and nodded slightly. She said she was okay, though her voice trembled. She did not want to cause more trouble. She only wanted the moment to end. The man took a step closer, not invading her space, but close enough to be heard. He apologized to her. Not quietly, not as a formality. He apologized in a way that made people listen. He said what happened was wrong. He said no one deserved to be treated that way, especially not someone doing their job. The room reacted in small ways. A murmur moved through the guests. A few heads nodded. Someone whispered, surprised by what they were hearing. The woman reacted instantly. She laughed sharply, as if the apology was a joke. She said the waitress had been disrespectful. She said she had every right to react. Her voice was loud now, defensive and angry. The man turned to her slowly. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. It was calm, but firm. He asked her to stop. He said there was no excuse for what she had done. He said being upset did not give anyone the right to harm another person. The woman stared at him, shocked. She was not used to being challenged, especially not in public. She argued back, her words coming faster now. She spoke about status, about expectations, about how places like this existed to serve people like her. The man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took a breath. He told her that money did not place anyone above basic respect. He said that if this was how she treated people when things did not go her way, then there was a serious problem. The manager stepped closer again, this time more confident. He asked the woman to lower her voice. He asked the waitress to step aside and take a moment. Another staff member gently guided the waitress toward the service area. As she walked away, she felt every eye on her back. Her hands were shaking, but she kept walking in the service area. She leaned against the counter, trying to steady herself. A coworker handed her a glass of water. Someone asked if she wanted to sit down. She nodded, grateful, but still overwhelmed. She felt embarrassed, angry, and sad all at once. Mostly, she felt tired from where she sat. She could still hear the voices from the dining room. The woman was still arguing. The man responded calmly, each word measured. He said this behavior was unacceptable. He said the evening was over. The woman raised her voice again, accusing him of choosing a stranger over her. She said he was humiliating her. The man replied that she had humiliated herself the moment she raised her hand. That sentence landed hard. Guests nearby inhaled sharply. Someone near the window shook their head in disbelief that the man asked the manager to bring the bill. He said everything would be paid for, including compensation for the waitress. He asked that the incident be documented properly. His request was not aggressive. It was precise. The manager nodded, relieved to have clear direction. He assured the man that the restaurant would handle the situation and support their staff. The woman looked around the room, realizing the attention was no longer on the waitress. It was on her. The confident image she had walked in with was gone. In its place was frustration and shock. She demanded they leave immediately. The man agreed, but on his terms. He told her they would talk later, privately. For now, he said, she needed to step outside. As they walked toward the exit, the room stayed quiet. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence felt like judgment. When the door closed behind them, the restaurant slowly began to breathe again. Conversations restarted, though softer than before. People exchanged looks, still processing what they had witnessed. The manager returned to the service area. He knelt slightly to speak to the waitress at eye level. He apologized for what had happened. He told her she did nothing wrong. He assured her the restaurant would support her fully. The waitress nodded, tears finally filling her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed to cry at work. But the kindness in his voice helped. It made the situation feel real, not just like a bad dream. A few minutes later, the man returned alone. He asked to speak with the waitress if she felt comfortable. The manager asked her quietly if she wanted to. After a pause, she agreed. The man approached respectfully. He apologized again, this time more personally. He said he was sorry she had been hurt and placed in that situation. He said her professionalism had been clear from the start. The waitress listened, still unsure what to say. She thanked him quietly. She said she just wanted to work and be treated fairly. He nodded. He said fairness should never depend on power. He left shortly after, giving the manager instructions to ensure everything was handled properly. As the door closed behind him, the waitress sat back down, exhausted. The night was not over, but something had changed. The fear she felt earlier had shifted into something else. A sense that she had been seen. That what happened mattered. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but no one would forget that moment. And neither would she. Not ever. The restaurant slowly returned to movement, but the feeling was not the same as before. People spoke in softer voices, as if the walls themselves were still listening. The waitress remained in the service area for a while, sitting quietly with a glass of water in her hands. Her body felt heavy, like she had run a long distance without stopping. Every few seconds, the moment replayed in her mind, even though she wished it would fade. A senior staff member stayed nearby, offering quiet support without too many questions. Sometimes silence helped more than words. The waitress nodded when asked if she was okay, though the answer felt complicated. She was safe, yes, but shaken, embarrassed, still trying to understand how a normal shift had turned into something so public and painful. After a short while, the manager returned and asked if she felt able to finish the shift. He made it clear that she did not have to. She could go home if she wanted. The choice mattered to her. She thought about rent, about responsibilities, about pride. After a moment, she said she would stay, but only if she could take things slowly. The manager agreed immediately. He reassigned her tables so she could work at her own pace. He also told her that the restaurant would file a report and handle everything officially. Hearing that brought a small sense of relief. It meant the moment would not be ignored or brushed away. As she returned to the floor, a few guests looked up at her. Their expressions were different now. Not judgmental, not curious, just human. One older couple offered a small smile of encouragement. Another guest quietly thanked her for her service. These small gestures mattered more than they knew. In the kitchen, staff members spoke in low voices. Word had spread quickly. Some were angry. Some were shocked. All agreed that what happened crossed a line. For many of them, it felt personal. They had all faced difficult customers, unfair treatment, moments where they swallowed pride to keep a job. Seeing it happen so openly reminded them how vulnerable they could be. Later that evening, the manager gathered the team briefly. He thanked them for staying professional and promised that the restaurant would stand behind its staff. He reminded them that no amount of money gave anyone the right to treat others without respect. The room was quiet as he spoke, but the message was clear and deeply felt. Outside the restaurant, the woman paced near the entrance, her anger slowly turning into frustration. She spoke sharply into her phone, complaining about embarrassment and betrayal. She felt wronged, unable to see past her own pride. The night air did nothing to cool her emotions. The man stood a short distance away, silent. He listened without interrupting. When she finally finished, he spoke calmly. He said the evening had shown him something important. He said respect was not optional, especially when power was involved. His words were not loud, but they carried weight. She accused him of choosing strangers over her again. He did not argue. He simply said that choosing kindness was not choosing sides. It was choosing values. That answer only frustrated her more. They left separately that night. No dramatic goodbye. No final argument. Just distance, heavy and unresolved. Back inside, the waitress finished her shift quietly. By the time the restaurant began to empty, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. When the last table left and the lights dimmed slightly, she helped clean her section, moving slower than usual, but steady. Before she left, the manager stopped her and handed her an envelope. Inside was a note from the restaurant, confirming paid time off for the next few days, along with contact information if she needed support. The gesture surprised her. She thanked him, her voice soft but sincere. When she finally stepped outside, the night felt different, cooler, quieter. The city moved on around her as if nothing had happened, but she knew better. Some nights stayed with you. Over the next few days, the story began to spread, not through loud headlines, but through conversations. A guest told a friend. A staff member mentioned it to family. People shared what they had seen, focusing not just on the incident, but on how it was handled. That many praised the restaurant for standing by its staff. Others talked about the man's response, surprised by his calm and clarity in such a tense moment. The focus slowly shifted away from the act itself and toward the message it left behind. For the waitress, the days after were quiet. She rested. She replayed the moment less often as time passed, though it never fully disappeared. She thought about work, about dignity, about how quickly life could change. When she returned to the restaurant, she was nervous. Walking through the doors brought back memories. But she was greeted warmly by her coworkers. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. She was allowed space to ease back in. Guests treated her with the same politeness as before, but she felt different inside. Stronger in some ways. More aware. She understood now that silence was not the same as weakness, and that being seen mattered, that the incident also changed how the restaurant operated. Training sessions were updated. Clear rules were reinforced about protecting staff. Managers paid closer attention. Small changes, but meaningful ones. As for the man, his actions continued beyond that night. He followed up with the restaurant to ensure everything was handled properly. He made it clear that accountability mattered to him, not just words spoken in public. The woman, on the other hand, found herself facing quiet consequences. Invitations slowed. Conversations shifted. People remembered how she acted when no one expected kindness. Time moved on, as it always does. But the memory of that evening remained in small ways. In how staff supported each other. In how guests spoke a little more carefully. In how one waitress learned that even in the hardest moments, dignity could survive. The night that began as just another shift had become something else entirely. Not because of the conflict, but because of the choices made afterward. And those choices would continue to echo long after the plates were cleared and the lights turned off. Time continued to move forward, but the impact of that night did not fade as quickly as people expected. For the waitress, life returned to its usual rhythm on the surface. Shifts started and ended. Orders were taken. Smiles were offered. But inside, something had changed. She stood a little straighter now. She spoke a little more confidently. Not louder, not rude, just clearer. She had learned that respect was not something to quietly hope for. It was something worth standing on. Customers still came and went, each bringing their own mood and story. Most nights were ordinary again, and she was grateful for that. Ordinary meant safe. Ordinary meant predictable. Still, every now and then, someone would recognize her. A quiet nod. A brief word of support. Nothing dramatic. Just small reminders that people remembered what happened and how it was handled. The restaurant itself carried on with subtle changes. Management stayed more alert. Staff felt more protected. There was a stronger sense of unity, like everyone understood they were not alone anymore. It was not written on the walls, but it lived in how people treated each other during long shifts and busy hours. One afternoon, a few weeks later, the waitress was called into the office before her shift. Her heart skipped for a moment. Old fear returned quickly, even though nothing about the tone suggested trouble. The manager greeted her warmly and asked her to sit. He explained that the restaurant had received positive attention because of how the situation was handled. Not the incident itself, but the response. The support for staff. The refusal to ignore what was wrong. He told her that a fund had been created to help employees facing difficult situations. Counseling support. Time off when needed. Clear steps for reporting issues. The waitress listened quietly, surprised that something painful had led to something protective. She nodded, unsure what to say, but grateful all the same. When she left the office, she felt lighter. Not because the past was erased, but because it had been acknowledged. That mattered more than apologies that faded with time. Elsewhere, the man reflected on that night in his own way. His life was filled with meetings, decisions, and people who agreed with him too easily. That night had cut through all of that. It reminded him of something simple but important. Power did not excuse behavior. Silence could become permission if left unchecked. He began to pay closer attention to how people around him treated those they thought had less power. He noticed small things he had ignored before. The way someone spoke to a driver. The tone used with staff. The jokes made behind closed doors. He started setting firmer boundaries, even when it made others uncomfortable. The woman faded from his life quietly. No public announcement. No dramatic ending. Just distance. Conversations stopped. Invitations were declined. He did not feel anger toward her anymore. Only clarity. Some lessons arrived late, but they still mattered. For the woman, the consequences were different. They did not arrive as punishment, but as reflection. Doors did not slam shut, but they did not open as easily either. People remembered how she had acted when she thought no one would challenge her. Reputation, she learned, was built in moments like that. Back at the restaurant, the waitress continued to grow into herself. She trained new staff with patience and honesty. She reminded them that mistakes happened, but disrespect was never acceptable. She shared what she wished she had known earlier, without bitterness. One evening, a young server approached her nervously after dealing with a difficult customer. The waitress listened, offered advice, and stayed nearby until the situation calmed down. In that moment, she realized how far she had come. She was no longer just surviving shifts. She was helping others through them. The memory of the slap never fully disappeared, but it no longer defined her. It became part of her story, not the whole thing. A moment that tested her, revealed the worst in someone else, and the best in unexpected places. The restaurant remained what it had always been on the outside. Soft lights, polished tables, gentle music. But inside, something was different. There was more care, more awareness, more willingness to speak up. Guests continued to enjoy meals, unaware of how close the place had come to ignoring something important. Most never knew the full story, and that was fine. What mattered was not attention, but change. On a quiet night near closing time, the waitress stood near the window, watching the city lights flicker outside. She thought about how quickly a normal moment could turn into a defining one. How choices, made in seconds, could echo for years. She had not chosen that moment, but she had lived through it. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength she did not know she had got. As she turned off the last light in her section and prepared to leave, she felt calm, not proud in a loud way, just steady. She stepped into the night, knowing that whatever came next, she would not disappear into silence again. Some stories end with applause. Others end quietly, with understanding. This one ended with people remembering that respect should never depend on status, money, or power. It should simply be human. And for everyone who witnessed that night, whether they spoke up or stayed silent, the lesson stayed with them. In small decisions, in everyday moments, in how they treated the next person who stood in front of them, just trying to do their job.